How do you pronounce your name? Okay, let me try this.
Yeah.
Is it Lisa Veliz Waweru?
Really good on the last name. My first last name is Veliz. So it's Veliz Waweru.
Veliz Waweru. So it's like a Peruvian slash Kenyan last name.
Yeah.
Hello, fellow peacemaker. Welcome back to episode 13 of Make Peace Not Beef. Today with me is Lisa Veliz Waweru, and Lisa works at the Climate Service, and she's also the co-founder of Women in Climate Tech. And I'm so lucky to have her on the show. And Lisa is going to talk to us about finance, sustainable investing, climate risk, and why the environment and economy are not mutually exclusive. And then we're going to talk about how we can help you get rich by investing in the planet's future. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to let Lisa introduce herself.
Hey, everyone. Thanks, Lily, for having me. My name's Lisa Veliz Waweru. I'm born in California, spent some time in Connecticut, South Africa, India, Kenya, Peru, have Peruvian heritage, married a Kenyan, and now I have a complicated name. But I mean, I like the idea of just being a global citizen. And I went to school for undergrad at UC Berkeley, and I studied environmental engineering, was always really excited about using engineering to help the planet. I have an MBA and Master's of Environmental Management at Yale. I focused my studies there on uniting this idea of profit, people, and planet, trying to debunk the myth that they are mutually exclusive. My early career was really focused on education. After pursuing some years in education, really wanting to take a deeper look at how I might use that skill set in the private sector. I worked in energy for a couple of years at a large utility. I currently work at the Climate Service, which is a software platform that helps our customers really understand, quantify, and manage their climate risk. So essentially puts a price on climate change.
Wow, very exciting. And you're so accomplished. Like, you've lived in different parts of the world, so you kind of see how climate change plays out in different cities and in different countries and how it's affecting different cultures and the way they live. Now, getting into our first major topic of today, which is talking about the relationship between the environment and the economy, which is often seen as antithetical in nature. But I would like to think of them as rather symbiotic, because without the environment, you really cannot have this extraction-based economy. So in your opinion, why is that we often think we can either invest in the environment or the economy, but not both? Do you think these two are really mutually exclusive?
That's a great question. I think it really comes from a classical economics training and background that most folks have generally. It's very new and recent in the grand scheme of economies, with recent regulation that's telling us to do otherwise. The foundation of economics, it's really based on limitless conditions, and more is always better. That's what you learn in Econ 101. So it's really just not the case with the environment. I think there are data limitations, even just in inability to quantify environmental impact when it comes to investing in environment and the economy. I've heard from some money managers, just anecdotally, that their future clients, i.e. millennials, Gen Z, they care about this stuff. And people are asking the question, how can I achieve both? So I really think that if more people are asking that question, how can I do both? We'll actually start to come up with more legitimate answers.
Totally. Absolutely. I mean, we live in a very market-driven economy, right? So if consumers are demanding for it, then the market will respond accordingly, and we will see more sustainable industries. So our economy hinges on this extraction-based model. People assume that our economy is going to grow indefinitely, despite the planet's finite resources. So we kind of compartmentalize this problem. On one hand, we overproduce and overconsume. And then on the other hand, we're panicking about climate change and wondering who's causing it. Like, duh. So given your background in finance and then sustainable investment, can you explain to us what are stranded assets and why is it important to move away from them?
Sure. And I mean, just to be clear, I don't have a background in finance. I am coming at this purely from the scientific angle. So stranded assets are really the concept that some assets ultimately will be rendered prematurely worthless. So, value of zero, given some major policy regulatory shift towards a low carbon economy. So as we put rules and regulations around what you're allowed to emit in terms of GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, some activities, physical properties, oil rigs are going to be worthless.
Yeah.
And the idea is that this is going to happen very rapidly. There's 25 countries that have a carbon tax. Canada is actually one of them. If a 26th country, for example, were to establish a carbon tax, high emitting polluters, maybe it's oil and gas, maybe it's manufacturing, may be faced with having to write down on their facilities what were once assets, they actually become liabilities.
Then what about countries like Saudi Arabia that depend on, let's say, oil for their economy?
Yeah. That's a huge concern. A lot of countries try to diversify their economies so that if one sector doesn't do particularly well, that they're not suffering. If any leaders are in that region of the world are listening out there, it definitely seems like a really opportune moment to diversify, boosting renewables, subsidies or whatnot. But yeah, essentially it's a big concern.
Absolutely, it is. But I think, like you said, it also opens the doors for a lot of opportunities, untapped potential that we have. So, knowing what we know about the importance of safeguarding the planet's future, I now would like to ask you to talk about how can we as consumers make money, but then still protect the planet's future. Can you break it down for us? What exactly is sustainable investing, and what are the metrics for determining how sustainable a portfolio is?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So, sustainable investing is really the idea that you can do well and do good at the same time. What we call in this world of sustainable investing ESG, or environment, social governance considerations. Basically, that those ESG considerations are made when making investment decisions. So, it's essentially saying this type of investing considers all of those previously disregarded types of metrics in our investment decision making. These metrics fall into 4 buckets. The World Economic Forum places them into people, planet, prosperity, and principles of government. So the 4 Ps. The people bucket is sort of around diversity reporting, wage gaps, health and safety. Planet is around water use or greenhouse gas emissions or land protection or other types of environmental metrics. Prosperity is around employment, wealth generation, taxes paid, and principles of governance are criteria measuring risk and ethical behavior. We're seeing pressure from consumers, demanding we want our companies to be sustainable. Companies are now trying to find ways to do this, not just only because of those consumers, but also because their investors are demanding it. So investors are now saying, how do you stack up against the next best company that I could invest in? And how do you perform on ESG criteria? And so now there's sort of this, if you can imagine, one ball with like 2 pressure points on it in opposite directions. There's only one way for that, that ball to go. And really it's to essentially become greener. Large corporates now have teams dedicated to this type of reporting on ESG metrics. You'll see, a number of different reporting frameworks. The Carbon Disclosure Project is in existence to capture emissions, Global Reporting Initiative, Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. So all of these go by sort of different acronyms: CDP, GRI, SASB. There's like a whole alphabet soup, like very much jargon of what it means to actually put out report that discloses all of this type of information. But investors are essentially demanding this, and consumers are as well. And so there's this new space where I guess companies are sort of reinventing themselves in some way to align with that. And this is not just in the US. The European Commission has been quite progressive on this front. And in March of 2018, so, we're talking now almost 3 years ago, they passed an action plan for financing sustainable growth.
I'm so glad that so many different organizations are taking initiative on this. So let's talk a little bit more about like the market growth projections for sustainable investing. I think that's what really interests a lot of our audience. Like, will I be able to get returns on my investments? So to give you some personal examples, earlier this year, I started building my own sustainable portfolio. So I started investing in companies like Beyond Meat and like Sun Power Corp and a bunch of other solar energy companies. And it's like, holy crap, by the end of 2020, all my stocks grew by on average 300%. I just saw the solar industry, like literally the stocks just skyrocketed. So do you want to comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is generally the trend and where investors are wanting to put their money in. I think it was MIT that came out with a correlation study between ESG ratings, operational performance, and companies that have stronger ESG performance generally are outperforming their peers in sectors. With all the regulation that we are anticipating, encouraging companies to disclose more. In the UK, types of climate-related risks are already mandatory. New Zealand as well, France. There's a bunch of countries out there that are already sort of on this early wave of mandatory disclosure. In terms of making money, you want to be ahead of the curve, and I think that's where it's going.
Absolutely. I agree. And I wish consumers were more aware of all this information that these companies are mandated to disclose. So speaking of that, now I want to segue the topic into what you do at Climate Service, which I think is super, super cool. So I think in order to ensure return on our investments, we must first understand companies' history and look at their past performance and their philosophy and operations and everything you've just talked about. So in order to better assess the strength of a portfolio and its future performance, what can companies and investors do to assess the climate risk associated with a business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Climate Service, we're a 3.5-year-old company co-founded in 2017. We quantify a specific type of risk, right? This is literally risk due to climate change. We help companies determine how the changing environment will actually impact their business. So will rising temperatures impact their labor productivity? Will rising sea levels close their operations and interrupt business essentially? And so I work with customers to unlock climate risk insights and really just the ways that climate change can impact their business's bottom line, because those pathways maybe aren't immediately obvious, right? You think about warming temperatures and you think an average of, 2 degrees Celsius, people think, oh, that doesn't really sound that much. But this is, again, on average, right? So this is a global mean that we're talking about and not, a local mean. Essentially, we want to help customers with our software put a price on climate change and say, okay, well, what's it going to cost me? Where should I really focus my efforts? I'm going to focus my efforts on the top riskiest, buildings that are most critical to me if I'm a manufacturer or a real estate investor. And so really trying to figure out what's it really going to cost and where.
Can you expand on what are some of the climate risks, for example, that a real estate investor would be interested in assessing?
Yeah, they might be interested in assessing the business interruption of a certain location based on either coastal flooding or tropical cyclones, which are hurricanes when they hit land. They might be interested in drought or water stress and how that impacts their tenants. If they're real estate investors, they own the building, but they likely don't operate it, and so they rent it out. Are their tenants going to experience hardship due to these extreme weather events? Does that make the building less marketable or rentable in the future? If they haven't planned for 4 storms hitting the coast of wherever they are, which closes down business or destroys property, that's something that they need to really be thinking about.
Totally. And especially with hurricanes becoming more and more frequent, and each time it just strikes even stronger, destroying thousands of homes along the way, and it's absolutely devastating. So I think it's extremely important that people start paying attention to this, even when they're investing in a home, right? Like, take the time to really study what is the pathway that the hurricane is likely to follow, because, these things will only strike more and more often as we become more impacted by climate change. And to your point, a lot of people don't think 2-degree increase is a lot, but in reality, like, our global crop yields will be significantly reduced by even just a 0.5 degree increase in the temperature, there comes to a point where we might run into a situation where we cannot grow crops quickly enough to feed the entire planet. All kinds of investors, whether you're like investing on behalf of a company or you're a personal investor like me, we should all be paying attention to these critical decisions. Like we are literally deciding our fate and we're voting with our dollars, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Many of us have some flexibility in what we invest in, right? If you work at a company that offers a 401k, a retirement type of fund, you can choose where to put your money typically. With your purchases, you're making investments. There's many ways that we're sort of actively or passively participating in the system.
Yeah, totally. And when it comes to solutions to climate change, I think technology is the first thing that pops up in people's head. Like, oh, how can we increase energy efficiency? We don't normally associate financial tools that is already out there that we can leverage to help mitigate the situation. Like you said, investing is a powerful, powerful tool that all of us have. Solutions to climate change do not always involve a novel solution with some complicated technology, but rather look for existing solutions that are already out there. And these are things that we can action on, such as investing. So now I want to take the conversation one level further, because we talked about investing in, personal financial welfare. So now let's talk about investing in the planet's future and what that looks like. Lisa, can you talk about the climate risk or opportunity associated with each of the different sectors? For example, education, finance, healthcare, and transportation, and agriculture, and what each of these sectors would look like if they were to decarbonize?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a really fun thought experiment, actually. In terms of travel, travel industry right now is very different, in 2020. And I really think travel is going to be more expensive, with a carbon tax being the primary instrument to get us to a low carbon economy. Virtual meetings will be the norm. But I do think that in order to conduct business, we'll definitely rely a lot more heavily on those types of meetings than physical travel to a place. And if we do go there, it'll be quite expensive. In terms of renewable energy and just energy in general, I really think decarbonizing the energy sector is going to be a huge challenge of our generation. I suspect that most of the renewables will be distributed and everywhere. I really envision not only just solar farms, but community solar, people paying you to put solar on your house. The harvesting of this resource is essentially limitless. In terms of finance, in terms of a low carbon future, I mean, Larry Fink of BlackRock just announced today, even in his annual letter, that they're basically going to be pushing companies towards net zero by 2050. And this is a huge statement that everyone has to be thinking about now. So I think in terms of financial sector, whether that's a commercial bank or investors or whatnot, they're going to have strict filters on what high carbon industries are. Loans will be priced differently for, depending on who you are and what you do. I think healthcare, anything that we can telehealth, we probably could be doing more of. I'd be curious on that one, at least, to know how that impacts outcomes, because I think with all the telecommuting and telehealth and working from home and whatnot, like, I don't think we're getting quite enough steps in our day. So maybe we'll all be connected to like wearables or something, and like they'll buzz or shock you or something when you need to take a run. And I do think that the transportation sector, being one of the largest that we need to tackle globally in terms of decarbonization, especially because we built highways for cars, we built roads for cars. Everything is based on this fossil fuel economy. We're already seeing a shift towards electric, but that's going to have to be a lot more dramatic. Personal vehicles, commercial vehicles, for shipping, what are we going to do about shipping? What are we going to do about air transport? There's a lot of sectors in transportation that can move towards electric, and hopefully that electricity is clean.
Because if it's coming from coal, then
it doesn't really help. Those are just some projections of what a decarbonized version of those sectors would be. Imagine if your streets were built for bikes, right? Electric bikes, scooters built for walking. If you had more mixed use commercial spaces within neighborhoods, instead of having to drive 30 minutes to the nearest store, access that a lot more easily. I definitely have a vision that is a positive one.
I have a lot of hope too. We touched on a lot of sectors that are directly associated with climate change infrastructure, like transportation, energy. But I also think there are a lot of latent industries that are going to be affected by climate change as well. Think about, for example, marketing and advertising, even though that's not a sector directly affected by climate change. But in order to help mitigate climate change, we have to change the way we market products, for example, the way we incentivize consumers to always buy more. We kind of tap into their psyche, and it's so ingrained in them to always overbuy and overconsume. So we have to change behavioral policies that we'll have to implement along with what we're doing with transforming infrastructure as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the movement towards infusing climate risk into all sectors is so encouraging. You know, who would have thought that, shoes could be lower carbon, but Allbirds is trying to figure out how to do that, right? Or who would have thought that you could get a green loan? Like, what does that even
Right?
mean? There's so many different sectors that are now trying to tap into that. And in 2020 alone, we saw BP announce peak oil in the mid 2020s, right? So announcing that it's going to happen this decade is a huge declarative statement around where they think the future is going of oil, and literally reflecting climate risk in their financial statements when they write down their assets. When you see these types of advancements and regulation popping up in all these different countries around the world, I'm really excited for what the social consciousness will be raised to. I mean, I have a daughter. I have an almost 2-year-old. I especially have her in mind when I'm thinking about the work that I want to do and the impact that I want to have, how I want to spend my time advocating for the right thing and working on the right problems in my life. I mean, I really hope that we can do it. I think it's only together that we can do this. Part of the reason why we founded Women in Climate Tech is just to really bring the right women in the right expertise and in their respective climate tech domains together, foster those connections and really push the solution space forward.
Wow, this is incredible. Can you talk a little bit more about that organization, Women in Climate Tech? How can I join?
Yeah, actually, you can join today, right now. Go to womeninclimatetech.org and just click Become a Member. I mean, we started as a grassroots collective that wanted to elevate women and non-binary individuals' voices on this topic of solutions, right, for climate. The network just grew. We've had such an outpouring of support and interest from all over the world, Middle East, Africa, Latin America, North America, Australia. Like, there's just so many incredible and accomplished women and non-binary folks working already in this space. And now it's just a matter of bringing them together. We just launched a couple weeks ago, and we are really excited about the interest, engaging with the new administration in the US at least, and potentially getting more journalists to cite our experts on their respective fields. Often you read an article about carbon capture and storage or renewable energy, and how many men are quoted in that? We need more people looking for balance in this space. And if we're going to achieve this net zero dream, we really need to put women on the same playing field.
Right. I think women play such a crucial role in defending the environment. For example, in certain parts of the world, especially in like Africa, Latin America, indigenous communities, like women are literally the guardians of water and environment. They are the collectors of water, and they are the ones to maintain the land. So I think it's so important to get women involved. Like, I think as women, we have a natural connection with nature. I'm not saying men don't, but in many parts of the world, women are the primary caretakers.
Yeah, women are collecting firewood, women are taking care of children, they're raising children to practice either sustainable practices or not. They really are the shapers of our society. What better way to bring all of these experts to, one, create a network to strengthen each other and lift each other up, two, to find equal footing, opportunities to speak and present and be quoted in publications, and really to make connections so that they are maximizing their career potential and their ambitions as well. So hopefully we'll touch on some professional development work too. But yeah, I mean, it's a nascent organization. We're really overwhelmed and so happy and excited that we have such interest. I think we really struck a vein with people when we launched this year, and I think the world was just ready for it.
Yeah,
You can find
absolutely.
us, just on our website. We're on LinkedIn as well. And we'll be more active in the coming months to come as we expand our outreach.
And I'm sure, as you mentioned, being a mother, that just gives you a newfound drive to tackle climate change because you want to preserve this planet for your daughter and all the next generation, right? They deserve to have a future that is better than what we currently have. I absolutely agree with you. Oh, wow, I've learned so much in this episode, especially on the power of the financial sector to shape the direction of our economy and cause this paradigm shift toward more sustainable living and long-term growth.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the culture shift we're going to see in the decades to come, because I think a lot more folks are going to have some climate change fluency in everything that they do because they'll see it, right? They'll have to pay for that expensive airline ticket, or telehealth will be the only option unless you have XYZ condition. You won't be able to invest in certain sectors because they'll be too cost prohibitive. So, I mean, it'll be embedded in our economy. It's just a matter of time. And so I hope we get there sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I really hope so too. And I'm also hopeful in the next generation. Like, I'm sure your daughter is going to grow up to be infinitely more environmentally conscious than all of us, perhaps.
I hope so. You know how you never know how they're turning out.
Oh
and
God,
then,
yes, that
and
is
then
true.
they just get there. They just get there and you're like, okay, that's who you are.
And you're like, how did I? No, I'm
Yeah.
kidding. No, I'm sure she has such a terrific mother as you, and I'm sure you're going to pass on all your philosophies onto her. And
Thanks,
yes,
Lily.
I appreciate you for being on the show and sharing with us all your insights. So, Lisa, do you want to just share your social media with our listeners and how they can get in touch with you or get involved with, women in climate tech?
Yeah, absolutely. The one social media I'll share is LinkedIn. You can find me there. Lisa Veliz Waweru, just search. If you visit www.theclimateservice.com, you'll find a little bit more about our climate risk analytics platform. And if you are interested in elevating women's voices in the solution for climate, visit womeninclimatetech.org. Feel free to reach out.
Yes, guys, please get in touch with Lisa. She is so knowledgeable and so passionate about everything that has to do with climate change and mitigating the risk. So thank you so much, Lisa, once again, for being on the show. I've learned so much, and I really hope that it helps our listeners as well. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Make Peace Not Beef today. I'll see you on the next episode.